a daughter of Queen Victoria should have meant living a fairy tale life full of wealth, power and love. Instead, she lived a life of betrayal, loss and tragic endings. This is part 1 of the forgotten story of Princess Alice. She was born a royal disappointment from the moment of birth. She was the 3rd child, and after a son was born last time, the public eagerly awaited the birth of another son and heir to the throne. Please continue to support my channel by subscribing. However, this was not to be when she was born a girl, Princess Alice, on the 25th of April 1843 at Buckingham Palace. Her birth was not a happy occasion. The Privy Council even sent a letter to her father, giving congratulation and condolence. Her life was different than people imagine a princess would live. She lived with parents who were obsessed with each other, but also obsessed with their children being the best that they could. Prince Albert developed the children's education, and it was a strict system that had to be stuck to. Alice and siblings dressed in practical, humble clothing, and they lived in unadorned lodgings without regular heating, as their mother preferred the cold. Alice was different from her siblings. She was extremely empathetic. She was one of the middle children of the large royal brood, and she got along with all of them, although she did have a closer bond with her older siblings, Vicky and Edward. Alice wanted more than her royal lifestyle. She wanted to experience a life outside of her royal family. She liked to visit the working-class tenants at Balmoral and find out how they lived. This desire to see how other people lived led to her escaping her governess one day in order to attend a local church and sit in the pews rather than attend her royal mass at Windsor Castle Chapel. This hinted at her rebellious side. As everybody has, Alice has 2 sides to her. She was dependable and empathetic, but she could also have a temper. This was perhaps learnt as a way to protect herself as a middle child that would have been up against her other headstrong and opinionated siblings. She was known to lash out with her tongue when she was angry with her siblings, and this only got worse over the years. When Alice was old enough and her mother deemed her fit for marital matchmaking, it was decided that she would be married while still a teenager. Her sister had just married Frederick of Prussia in 1858, and now it was time for her to be matched to an eligible bachelor. Victoria was keen on a love match for her daughter, so long as it was one of the eligible European royal houses. This did not leave a large scope for a real love match, and the options were very far and few. Alice's newlywed sister Vicky was in charge of compiling a list of eligible European bachelors. She only found 2 men suitable: William the Prince of Orange and Prince Albert of Prussia. Albert of Prussia was also Vicky's husband's cousin, and when Princess Alice was set up to meet these suitors, she was not happy with it at all. The family of the Prince of Orange were beside themselves with glee at the prospect of him marrying an English princess, and so he travelled from the Netherlands to Windsor Castle to meet the potential bride and her mother-in-law. Alice was brutal in her response, and she was not keen at all, and she told her mother she did not like him at all. Her second match seemed even more unsuitable because she was far too good for him. The second suitor was recommended as the cousin of Alice's new brother-in-law, Frederick. But Frederick himself claimed his cousin wasn't good enough for Alice, who deserves the very best. Her options were now down to 0, but there was another man, an underdog of a suitor. Her sister Vicky started to rack her brain for another match after her first 2 choices crashed and burned. Eventually she landed on Prince Louis of Hesse. He came from a respectable German house, and Queen Victoria invited him to Windsor Castle to meet his future bride. She liked him immediately, and the sparks were flying. They got on amazingly in each other's company. Upon his departure, he asked for her autograph as a keepsake, and Alice was impressed with him. Queen Victoria immediately made plans to marry the pair, but then tragedy struck and her grandmother died. Princess Alice was immensely happy during the spring of 1861. She had met her life love and had gotten engaged in the April to Prince Louis. But it was also full of sorrow for her maternal grandmother, the Duchess of Kent, when she died in her bed. Alice wasn't just close to the Duchess, she had also taken up the job of nursing her in her final weeks of life, and so she had to watch as her grandmother deteriorated before sadly passing away. Her looking after her family members did not stop there. She took on the role of family caregiver. When her mother struggled with her emotions, she was sent by her father to comfort her. But tragedy struck again. Her father became gravely ill, and again she took on the role of looking after him. On December 1861, Alice's father, Albert, fell dangerously ill, with complications from undiagnosed Crohn's disease. The prince had struggled with his health throughout his whole life, but he had been particularly stressed out with the debauched behaviours of his son, Edward, who had been parading his mistresses in public. Queen Victoria and Princess Alice believed they could save Albert by tending and caring for him, but their hope vanished when he passed away from his illness. The fallout from his death plunged the public and the royal family into a deep state of mourning. Queen Victoria blamed her son for killing her husband due to the stress he had brought to his door. She even refused to notify her heir of his father's death. Alice was not one for tensions in the family, but she was struggling with the morality of not telling her brother of her father's death, and so she betrayed her mother when she went behind her back to sneak a telegram to Edward. Victoria and Edward never fully reconciled with the Queen, remarking that, "I never can or shall look at Edward without a shudder." This act of rebellion meant that her relationship with her mother was forever tarnished, but Alice had more to worry about than this. Her grandmother and father had not long died, but she was still planning the wedding to her true love, Prince Louis of Hesse, and so she got married among the most tragic time during the Victorian era. In pure British fashion, and with a stiff upper lip, Queen Victoria insisted that the ceremony go ahead even after Prince Albert passed. The wedding went ahead on the 1st of July 1862, but it was not the fairy tale wedding she had hoped. It was more of an extension of the family's mourning than a wedding. Alice should have gotten married and it should have been the happiest day of her life, but it turned more into a nightmare. The whole palace was still in the depths of mourning for Prince Albert, and no one was trying to hide it. Her large opulent wedding was downsized from a church to converting the dining room of her childhood home into a chapel. Not only was her wedding much smaller than anticipated, she also wore black at her wedding. She arrived to the ceremony in a white gown with a lace veil and an orange blossom and myrtle classic bouquet that represented a royal getting married. But Queen Victoria demanded that everyone adhere to mourning protocol and forced everybody to wear black before and immediately after the wedding. The Queen made the wedding all about her, her feelings and her presence. The Queen had her sons take her into the makeshift chapel. She had them stand in front of her to shield her from prying eyes throughout the entire ceremony. While the pair married, the monarch sat in an armchair near the altar and tried not to cry. The nuptials were miserable, with the Queen even noting that it was more of a funeral than a wedding. The poet Alfred, Lord Tennyson, said, "It was the saddest day that I can remember." The wedding was finished by 4 p.m, and when the evening began to slow down, Queen Victoria gave her a gift. Victoria presented Princess Alice with a gold bracelet inlaid with pearls and diamonds. It was from both of her parents, and it was inscribed with the words, "To dear Alice, from your loving parents, Albert and Victoria, are who thou, visibly parted, are ever united." With the miserable day over with, Alice could finally look forward to her honeymoon, but unfortunately this was no better than the wedding. Alice had a miserable wedding, but she was living a happy marriage with her new husband. She was extremely happy, and this made things difficult with her mother, who was grieving her husband. The monarch was jealous of Alice's happy, content life, and so the princess had to try to not look too happy when she was around her mother. It was a difficult start to her married life and her relationship with her mother, but it would take a much darker turn. Alice moved to Louis's home in Darmstadt. As royal brides often do, she had to move out of the family home and into the family of her new husband's household. She arrived there in 1862 and crowds of people welcomed her with cheers, and she wrote to Queen Victoria, "I believe the people never gave so hearty a welcome." Despite the warm welcome from the people, Alice was extremely homesick. She was also bored of her new life, but she shouldn't have worried about being bored. Join me in part 2 to learn of how Alice experienced further loss with the death of her own children before also losing her own life too. Please continue to support my channel by subscribing. Please comment, like and subscribe if you wish for more stories, and leave your suggestions below and I will endeavour to cover them.